Greetings, Herle Burlyites. I want to talk about an issue I have some strong personal feelings about. Social isolation is a debilitating and dangerous illness, and that's especially true in our seniors population. When people with dementia are not in contact with the people closest to them, they lose their cognition and orientation to time, place, and person. So it's absolutely critical that they stay in touch. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, recognizes this, and their TELUS Mobility for Good COVID-19 Emergency Response Program has delivered more than 10,000 smartphones and tablets paired with $0 data plans to hundreds of nonprofit organizations across Canada. Here's just one story. Lockdowns at Manitoba care homes to prevent the spread of COVID-19 began mid-March as emergency public health measures swept the country. Almost immediately, Jan Legeros, Executive Director of the Long-Term and Continuing Care Association of Manitoba, sought out tablets and smartphones to help support over 12,000 seniors in the association's care. TELUS became a natural partner for this. From the onset of the pandemic, they moved quickly to expand their Mobility for Good initiative to keep even more vulnerable Canadians connected to their loved ones. That's helped to reassure families that their loved ones are safe and secure. People like Jan Legros were relieved that her residents were able to stay in touch with their loved ones while emergency isolation measures kept them apart. To read more stories like this one and to learn more, visit connectingcanadaforgood.ca. All right, Herle Burlyites, we've got a special 1 + 2 = 4 podcast for you today. And if you think my math is wonky, I want you all to know that I absolutely aced my cognitive test last week. The doctors, they couldn't even believe it. The first few questions, easy, sure. But I'll bet you Herle Burlyites couldn't even answer the last 5 questions. They get very hard, the last 5 questions. Very hard. I bet Chris Wallace couldn't answer the last 5 questions either. Anyway, here's how 1 + 2 = 4 today. First up on the pod, it's Kate Bezanson and me. Dr. Bezanson is Associate Professor in the Department of Sociology and Associate Dean of Social Services at Brock University. An expert and advisor on social policy and political economy. She says the government must appropriately support childcare services if it wants to see a lasting recovery from the pandemic. We're going to talk about that issue and whether the government has met that challenge. Next up on the pod, it's the political panel, which today is the ever-feisty Jenni Byrne. And me again. We loved having Chris Ball do the show last week, and much as he enjoyed being on, he decided he'd rather be living in a tent this week somewhere in Algonquin Park with plenty of moose and mosquitoes and apparently very little internet access. Jenni and I are going to pick up on the Kate conversation, and we'll also duke it out over Canada and China, the we problem, the ever-growing shape-shifting what will we discover this week we problem. We'll talk about Trump fighting Chris Wallace on Fox News last Sunday. And if there's still time after all that, no way, Blue Jays. Did the federal government make the right decision shuffling the Jays off to Buffalo? Kate Bezanson, I'm so thrilled you're joining us on the Herle Burly this morning. Thanks for getting up early.
It is absolutely my pleasure. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. So, I don't know. We're in sort of like the 5th month of this thing or something like that. Yeah. How you been doing? You look like you're in a pretty sweet location right now.
I am.
Is this where you've been living for the last 5 months?
Oh, if wishing made it so. No, we've just come to a family cottage for the week, and it is soul restoring and splendid. Although you may see, if you're watching this, some chipmunks amble by, and there are some dive bombing hummingbirds as well. So it could be really entertaining.
Well, that could be beautiful. You've been hanging in generally through this period of time? You've been managing to work and be productive? And
Yes, I have. I would say that this has been a really mixed pandemic, personally. I think for a lot of us, we've had the experience of feeling really strangely blessed for the circumstances that we have. It puts everything in kind of sharp relief. So my employment has been obviously very secure. My kids have been very healthy and well. My dad, who's immune compromised, has been well. It's afforded me a kind of time with my kids that I haven't had before, or not at least since they were little. So there are some moments of, grace and appreciation. And then there is the other side on the child front. My kids are older, so 13 and 17, where I discovered that much like teaching my 17-year-old to drive, having your mom homeschool you is not a relationship builder. It was a harsh look in the mirror. I teach adults. Right? So that was maybe a lower point in our collective undertaking. And my spouse owns a small business that has been very hard hit in this pandemic. So a lot of the policy work that we've been observing and that I've been talking to people about, some of it is also very deeply and intimately lived in terms of the wage subsidy, in terms of the kind of layoff decisions that small businesses have to make and the difficulty pivoting. And then, of course, the pandemic, I think, largely would be marked by me by a certain kind of existential policy angst about a gender regressive recovery, about childcare, about schools, and about where we go from here. Because this is brand new. None of us have lived through something like this before, and we're all, working without a net.
Right.
And you?
Well, I'm great. I'm great. And you raised the essential. What I was thinking about while you were talking to me was the people I have on this show are all fine. Yeah. They're all fine health-wise, and they're all fine financially. Everybody's job is carried on. They've been able to work from home. The paycheck has continued. And so, in many respects, this has been kind of an enjoyable time. You found things that you can do with your family and things like that. But if you were on the CERB and you didn't know if your job was coming back or suspected it wasn't, this would be an entirely different experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And this is the, I think it's a moment where those of us who have had the experience of this being definitely not a seamless transition, but who have been able to pivot to working at home. 60% of jobs, according to Statistics Canada, in Canada, they're not able to be done remotely. So it's actually not the majority of us who can do this. So for those of us who have been able to do that pivot and been able to do that with economic security, this is real. We are very fortunate, and I think that it's important to take stock of that position and then think about policy development for the most of us who don't have that experience.
Right. So let's dig into it. You and Monica Lysak and Andrew Bevan have written a piece for our website, the Quotes media site, about what needs to happen to reopen. And I'd like to talk to you about that piece today and some related issues. Can I start by understanding what your operating assumption is regarding school, though? Because maybe I'm wrong, but I can't separate the two issues of childcare and school. So is it your assumption that there will be 5-day-a-week school this September? So
I don't know what to assume as a baseline. I think if we look across the country, if you'd asked me a week ago, actually, we'd look across the country, I'd say some jurisdictions, yes. We're seeing numbers in the last week in Alberta, in Quebec, that are making us maybe think differently about what the fall will look like. So I think anything we say is a guess, and we need a couple of plans in order to be able to pivot and to do the kind of in real time changes to delivery that may have to happen. So if I'm gazing in my crystal ball, my magic ball, the overused metaphor, the only other one that is more overused is unprecedented. This is an unprecedented experience. I think at least in Ontario, we will likely see a couple of different models. There may be school boards that are able, that are in jurisdictions that have incredibly low or no incidence of the virus, that may be able to do a much more resume to normal looking delivery. And in others, we may see the quadmester or the trimester. There are many models being looked at, especially for the high school level. So I guess if I were putting my money, if I were a betting person, and I'm I'm not sure I am in this context. I do not think that we're going to be full day in the way that we have been. So it could be shorter days. It could be a 1 week with 1 day off, some remote delivery, all of which speaks to the need to have a huge plan in place for what we're going to do with these kids and do it safely.
Okay, so let's return to that a little later, because to me that means that more people than required childcare before the pandemic may require it in September.
Yes, absolutely.
But let's start with your proposal, which is really has some long-term ambitions, but is very sharply focused on how to get people who had childcare pre-pandemic back to having childcare.
Yeah.
Can I start by getting a couple of facts on the table for you?
Yeah.
Absent any action, given the situation we have now, how many children who were in childcare in February will not have an available space in September?
So it's really hard to know. And this is in part why this sector and this area of policy is one of the more complicated ones for governments and parents to figure out. So different jurisdictions have different approaches. So you have, up until recently, I'll use Ontario as the example, you can only have 10 people in a childcare room, in a pod. That's now been expanded to 15 kids plus staff. So that is maybe a bit closer to what we had before, because it all depends on ages and ratios and so on. So up until last week, the model meant that most child care centers were maybe operating at 25, 35% capacity. And of course, there's huge variety across the country because childcare is a provincial jurisdiction. So just on those numbers alone, there's a significant percentage of kids who are not able to go back to the spaces that they had. And this is presuming we're talking about regulated childcare spaces. We also have, of course, hugely increased costs because you have staff-child ratios that are up, you have cleaning costs that are up, you have tuition or fee payment that has stayed the same, but you have fewer kids in the center. So the viability of the centers, where about 85% of the revenue for centers is from parent fees, it simply makes it unsustainable. So this is sort of a moving number. And then on top of that, we have the question of parental confidence and cost. And parental confidence, I think, is one of the most important variables that we need to put in this mix, that we don't want to face a situation where we get schools completely ready to go in the fall and we miraculously put together the kind of childcare supports that are absolutely needed. And then we have parents who are really, really scared to send their kids because they don't have confidence that we've put the structures in place. And I say we, collectively, all of us in our work have put the structures in place to ensure that those kids are safe and that their learning environment is a safe learning and play environment. So there's the parent confidence side of things. And then, of course, there's also the cost side of things, that if you had a space and you were working and you lost your job, you may not have the financial resources to return to that space. And one of the things I like to keep in the back of my mind is the CERB is $2,000. An infant space in Toronto is $1,700. So in terms of the cost of care, we were not in a situation going into this where we had an affordable, accessible childcare system.
Okay, but working people can't pay $1,700 a month either, right?
Right. Yep. You got
so
it.
for a lot of people, is this an academic question?
No. Okay. So I would say it's not an academic question. And because childcare is provincially regulated, provincially governed, and in some jurisdictions it has municipal operators as well, there are a range of structures in place where some families who meet income thresholds will have access to subsidies for those spaces. So there are a variety of entry and income replacement options in childcare. Certainly not enough, and I think I think that we can do a lot better. I think when we sort of target spaces and do subsidies, we end up with real problems in our system, in the sense that it can exclude a lot of people who should be included, and it can decrease the opportunities for social solidarity, like we have in schools and healthcare, for example. We're all in it together. We all pay for it. We're all invested in it, and we don't sort of say, well, you got it. If I don't have it, you shouldn't have it. I think, as a public policy area, it should be overflowing with the potential for social solidarity.
How many families rely on two incomes?
I could pull the Stats Canada data if my Wi-Fi network was better here, but I would say about somewhere in the neighborhood of 3/4 of families would absolutely rely on more than one income in Canada.
Okay, let's move into the she session part of this. Of two income families, what percentage of those families will it be the woman who stays home if there's no childcare versus the man who stays home if there's no childcare?
Well, again, my crystal ball tells me that that the kind of decisions that households make around who provides care there are a number of variables that go into them, and good sociological research has gone into this kind of decision making. So when we have households where it's usually women who earn the lower income, and this is the case in a great many Canadian households, the decision is often an economic one. And one of the ways that we can see that happening is, of course, when we look at leaves to care, parental leaves, the decision making is often along income lines. So if you have a lower income and you're going to take a leave, you prioritize often the person who has the higher income to stay in the labor market, and it's often men. Now, of course, there are other variables that go into that, and there are policies that can redress that. But I think we certainly can reasonably predict that it's going to be the girls who are likely going to either exit the labor market or reduce their labor market attachment, or attempt to do what many have been trying to do, and with great difficulty, which is do it all from home, often with kids at home, a model that is wholly unsustainable for all involved.
Right. Now let's just take a step back, because even before this childcare issue became really salient, people were describing this as a she session, and saying that it was different from previous recessions, which had mostly hit the male working population. And so therefore the proper economic response to those things was infrastructure building and things that get men back to work. But this was a recession that hit women harder than men, and cost more women their jobs than cost men their jobs. Women don't work generally on infrastructure projects on the construction side. So it requires a different type of economic response, of which childcare is one. Everybody has talked about this. Do you see that governments actually understand this? That's a very good question. I think it's a concept that, and most people working in this area are calling it a social infrastructure investment, to make the distinction between built infrastructure, which we recognize, right? It's your roads, it's your bridges, it's your shovels in the ground. We've canvassed it well. So we think about the 2008 recession, which emanated from the financial sector. It was all those big signs about the building Canada, building back Canada. I can't even remember what they are now, but they were ubiquitous and everywhere, and they really were a built infrastructure. Canada's Economic Action Plan. I think Jenni Byrne will remind me. Jenni Byrne will remind me. Canada's Economic Action Plan.
You're right. I can see it, and I can see there was an arrow. Yes, I have it burned in my brain. And that was a financial recession that emanated from the financial sector, and this is a very different kind of recession, as you've alluded to. It was instigated by by a health crisis, and it was women in particular who were pushed or called out of the labor market in the earliest stages, whether by virtue of the fact that they were significantly represented in the sectors that were immediately hit, especially in the service and retail sectors, and also because schools and childcare were closed, and those children needed an adult who was able to both do the kind of pedagogical supports that they needed, but also, to take care of the small humans. And we saw the recent RBC report looked at labor force data from April that showed that women's labor market participation in April was at a 30-year low, that we've gone back to the 1980s, at least in April, in terms of the labor force participation. So this is not small, and it really is or it has been largely a recession that has hit women's paid and unpaid work significantly, but it's also demonstrated to us that the kind of work that is essential, that we've deemed essential, is caring work. And that caring work has largely not been resourced in the kinds of ways that we would want and need, both for it to function the way we need and to protect one another in the context of a health crisis. So,
that's so April.
Yeah.
That's so
know,
April.
It's so April.
Nobody talks about those essential workers anymore. That's over.
I know. God, we moved so fast through all of it. Well, let's remember we were talking about that. But the idea of social infrastructure is a really important one, because one of the things that we know, and the UK has done quite a good job in thinking about this, is the kinds of investments that we do in social infrastructure have huge multiplier effects. So the Women's Budget Group in the UK has done an analysis of what are the returns on investment for built infrastructure versus social infrastructure, and they have an interesting methodology. And they find that social infrastructure investments have 2.5 times the return. And part of that is, of course, let's just take childcare. Let's imagine that we suddenly invest significantly in building the kind of childcare system that Canada has needed for over 50 years. That you have built infrastructure, because you are going to need more centers and retrofits and all of that. So you're going to stimulate some traditionally male employment. And you are going to stimulate female employment in that sector, because childcare is disproportionately, ECEs are women. So you're going to have a larger, more highly trained labor force, hopefully better remunerated labor force. They're going to pay taxes. That's going to generate income in the local economy, all of those nice ripple effects. But it's also going to call women into the labor market that is going to have significant effects on their and their children's lifetime risk of poverty, all of those lovely, tax and revenue outcomes, and decreases in social spending in other areas. So in terms of thinking about how do we change our approach to stimulus and recovery, social infrastructure is a really good bet for a very different kind of recession. How's that?
That's really good. That was really that was really, really interesting. So tell me about your plan.
My plan.
Tell me about the Bezanson Lysac Bevan plan.
Well, it's a couple. So we have, as you've alluded to, produced this very short brief on trying to think about what the short term, the medium term, and the long term can look like. And obviously, we're really focused, especially right now, on the childcare and school nexus, which is a complicated one to pull apart. In the shortest term, we have been saying, I would say at least since March, that the first step, of course, is to ensure that kids can get back to the caregivers that they had before, and that parents can send their kids back to childcare. So in the most immediate sense, just restoring to whole to pre-COVID levels the childcare sector, to redress a lot of the lags that we've just been talking about labor market return. And
And is all that infrastructure just sitting there waiting to be reactivated?
So here's the problem. It is, except that it may require satellite spaces. And because there are different protocols in different places, obviously we require...
And kids spread this thing, right? Like, we're now learning that kids are just as much spreading this thing as anybody is.
So, and I wouldn't want to present myself as a health expert in how children spread germs. I would say this is really new and it's mixed. And so you want to take the best...
I thought the rule about how kids spread germs was that if your kid gets something, you get something.
Yes,
that's the rule about colds.
So this has absolutely been my experience with the small people. And I feel I got all the things when they were little. So I would say that because this is new, it's really mixed. So there are some studies out of, for example, Denmark that show that young kids under 10 are not super spreaders. And then there are studies coming out of Israel, for example, that say that schools have actually been a site of significant transmission. So I think we have to take the best advice that's available, but I would say if I'm designing how we approach this, I want to be absolutely as cautious as possible. And the last thing we want is to put our kids and teachers and all of the people that those people have contact with, who are going to be grandparents and parents and your coworkers and my coworkers and my friends' kids and the woman down the street. So I think we want to be absolutely as cautious as possible. And that will mean that we're going to have to spend more money. And it also means that we're likely going to have protocols around physical distancing that it's going to mean we're going to need more spaces. And we have spaces available in cities and municipalities and townships all over, but we need to repurpose them.
Conservatives tell me that the issue, you're talking about government investment in the infrastructure of childcare. Mm-hmm. Conservatives tell me that this issue was settled in the 2006 election campaign, and that Canadians chose individual support to cover the cost of childcare rather than public investment in spaces. And their evidence that issue was decided is that that's basically been the Trudeau government's approach. They did not come back in 2015 with a childcare program. They came back with increasing the child benefit for parents to pay for their own childcare and assorted things. Now you're coming along and you're saying, I don't accept that consensus, and I want government to get back into building spaces.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I am. I take issue with that conclusion. And I would say that what we've had so far is what we've seen in most jurisdictions in Canada is a tremendously failed policy approach. And I think it's an indictment of a cash for care model rather than drawing the conclusion that there's no appetite for increasing spaces and building a system. I think what we have is the childcare market. We have for-profit delivered care, we have not-for-profit delivered care, we have regulated care, we have unregulated care, we have care that's in centers, we have care that's delivered in homes. All of it, or the vast majority of it, is paid for by parent fees. It depends on your level of income, whether you can afford it. If you don't have a lot of cash, even if you get a cash transfer for childcare, let's say you have cash for care, you are going to try to find the cheapest care, which is going to stimulate low-wage female employment, which is part of the problem that has led us to where we are right now. So we create a virtuous cycle of a permanently low-wage female precarious labor market that has all of the care insecurity outcomes that we've seen, and it forces families to make the kind of choices that they're having to make right now in pandemic. So I think, with due respect to my colleagues, I would say that the cash for care logic has produced a market system that is in very large measure a market failure in Canada. We need public investment in childcare, and we need to think about it the same way that we would think about other areas of public delivery, including I think we intuitively understand schools. We wouldn't be talking about, well, my school's kid can't open because, after pandemic, because we didn't have the money, and there weren't, we had to socially distance, so there's no schools. We have to close the center. We don't have schools applying for rent subsidy. We don't, so I think there's a moment where we have now understood the imperative of care for small and medium-sized humans up to age 12. It's been put in stark relief in this moment in a way perhaps we haven't seen it before. And its invisibility has been part of the difficulty in moving it across that finish line. So with due respect, I would say cash for care, not so great.
Why are you focusing so much on the federal government when this is a provincial responsibility? Why are you looking to the federal government for cash and leadership?
Sure, that's a great question, and you'll forgive me. So I'm constitutional law nerd a little bit, so you'll forgive me if.
Oh, Jesus!
I know. I even did a law degree in constitutional law just to make sure. Yeah, I know. It's an affliction. So one of the things that, in specific to this particular moment, so let's just talk specifically in pandemic or in coronavirus, we have clearly seen that there is enormous need for federal leadership in a range of areas for lots of reasons. One of it, which is, of course, to have a coordinated response. We've seen this in relation to some of the approaches around healthcare. We've certainly seen that the federal government has a capacity to leverage funds and transfer those funds rapidly, and has access to that in a way that many provinces may have less nimbleness around. And in the end, we need to think about policy development in a way that doesn't, especially when we think about childcare, we need to think about policy development in a way that doesn't give us what I've been sort of thinking about as postal code social citizenship. So where you live determines what your access to a support is. So if you live in Quebec, for example, if you had an infant and they have a kind of complicated scale, but the average payment that you would have in Quebec would be under $200 a month for an infant spot. Whereas if you live in Ontario, as I've mentioned, it'd be $1,700 or $1,800. In British Columbia, where they've introduced an escalating $10 a day model, you would be paying, obviously, a lot less. So where you live determines what you get. And so if we're talking about a kind of the potential of a gender regressive recovery because of the conditions that we've laid out, do we want to then say, well, so if you live in Quebec, you're going to have really good labor market outcomes for women, but if you live in another province where we don't have those kinds of investments, we're going to have really crappy outcomes. So I think there's a role for federal leadership, federal vision, and for a kind of similarity in access, in delivery, in quality, and so on. And I think that it is incredibly overdue. I mean, this December is the 50th anniversary of the Royal Commission on the Status of Women, whose chief recommendation was a national childcare system. So we've been doing this for 50 years. It's difficult. This is not an easy policy area. So there is a reluctance, I think, on the part of governments to really put their arms around it and say, yes, we're going to do it. Good care is not cheap. Cheap care is not good. It's not inexpensive, but it has returns on investment that grow the economy, that sustain the economy, and that are a really good bet for getting us out of this and keeping us out of this kind of care-led recession. That's my pitch.
Have you asked for too little? The government's given $625 million out of their $19 billion.
Yeah.
You say it should be in the paper. You say it should be $2 billion. But in 2006, the federal child care program was $2 billion. So how can $2 billion in 2020 be enough money?
These are good questions. And the reality is that we're all working with really imperfect.
By the way, in 2006, nobody said that $2 billion was going to solve the problem.
No.
Even in 2006.
No.
So it's not like that was a lot of money.
So in the paper that we've just released, we revisit the idea of the $2 billion investment. And what we're talking about there is in the shortest possible term. It's sort of an emergency transfer that goes within that $19 billion Safe Restart Agreement. That goes to restoring capacity in the sector. So this is that's not a like, let's build a whole system for $2 billion. That's let's figure out how to get it back to sort of restore to whole so that those spaces and that capacity exists again. So we estimated, based on what is imperfect information in the sense that, there's reduced capacity in centers because they can have fewer kids, but there's also reduced take-up in some centers because parents are nervous and they're scared to put those kids in the centers. So the kind of variables that you can do around how much income do you have coming in, how many kids, and so on is less than perfect. So you take the imperfect information and you make, a decent guess. So we estimated that it would take about $2 billion in the shortest term to restore the sector to whole. The Safe Restart Agreement allocated $625 million, so less. And so I think that there is an opportunity here to say, okay, we don't know what happened in those negotiations, and we know that federal provincial negotiations are at the best of times a tap dance on the head of a pin. And in pandemic, there's been great evidence of real collaboration across jurisdictions. There's been evidence of a set aside of ideological entrenchments and a rolling up the sleeves for what we've been calling Team Canada. And I would like to give a lot of credit for that approach. It has not been on the Canadian menu for some time, so I'm pleased to see its presence as, I'm going to extend the metaphor, the main course. But I think that despite not having all of the details of what that looks like, the 625 is short term for 6 to 8 months. It's a start. What we've seen, and I would say in a number of jurisdictions, not just in the federal jurisdiction, is there's been an initial volley. So we think about, for example, when the CERB was first released, you had to have no income, and then it was pivoted that you could earn up to $1,000. There's been revision to policy in pandemic in a way that we simply don't see regularly, don't see normally. And I think that, in my view, there is a significant need to be thinking about not just childcare, but the childcare, school age care nexus. I think the 625, absent any details having been released, is inadequate to the scenarios that we can imagine about what fall will likely look like. And I think that it is one of those where it would be really smart to create some kind of reserve fund that could pivot quickly to respond to emerging conditions, to allow kids to safely return to school, to safely return to care, and to allow their parents to return to work, to restore our economic heft.
What if I was to tell you?
I'm fearful.
What if I was to tell you that you might be at the only moment you'll ever have of political leverage on this issue?
Yeah.
Because I'm going to say something. I've worked for two governments, Paul Martin and Kathleen Wynne, that were dead serious about childcare and wanted to do something about childcare. And those governments did that despite public opinion, not because of public opinion.
Yeah.
The sad truth, and I can tell you this from 25 years of survey research, that the only people who care about childcare enough to conceivably vote on it are women who need a space right now. Women of any other age don't really care, and even men of that age don't care. So normally the only political constituency for childcare are women who need a space right now. And of course, no government can deliver a space right now. So you can't even appeal to those people.
Yeah.
So normally it's something you're doing just because you believe in it as a policy framework, not because there's any politics to it. But now you have a situation where everybody needs a space.
Yeah.
And so there could be dramatically more people behind some sort of big move on childcare right now than would normally be the case. I would encourage you to be bold right now.
Yes, I thought I was being bold. I could be bolder. No, but I agree.
Well, you thought you.
I agree with your diagnosis. I agree with your diagnosis that we have a confluence of variables that I don't think we've seen before. And certainly it's not just childcare, but I would say it's the care economy writ large. We understand the relationship between the precarity of the labor force in long-term care, for example, and the kinds of outcomes that we've had in pandemic. We understand that the precarity of having a market system in childcare has produced a huge number of insecurities in that sector and real vulnerabilities in that sector. We understand that if we think about the care economy, it also includes the whole amalgam of unpaid care that facilitates all of our labor market participation. And I think we understand that on a scale that we haven't understood before. And I think employers understand it on a scale that they haven't understood before, that their capacity to have an engaged, capable, fully present labor market and workers relies on having that architecture, that care architecture around them. So I agree with you. Diagnostically, we have not had a moment like this before. I think that the benefits of childcare accrue over time, and that is the problem. You're absolutely right. Like, we could spend a lot of money today and it wouldn't build a system today. And it's simply, you need staff, you need buildings, you need all of those resources, and that accrues over time. So politically, you're right. It has always been a bit of a difficult sell to make it an election issue. And I think that's absolutely not the case right now. In fact, I think if we don't get this together and we don't figure out the school childcare nexus, and we don't figure out not just a short-term fix, but a long-term fix, it doesn't matter what level of government you work for. You could be the mayor of a city, you could be the premier of a province, you could be the prime minister. Nobody thinks, oh, childcare is this jurisdiction. They think, I've lost my job, my kid doesn't have care, and I'm going to blame the first elected official I see because we need this. So the risks politically are really huge right now, and maybe that's good leverage, but I think it also has to just be good policy to avoid a gender regressive recovery and postal code access to a kind of support that I think should be fundamental for all families and for kids.
So it doesn't surprise me that Doug Ford or Scott Moe or Jason Kenney don't really get this that much. But it does surprise me that you've had such an unwilling partner at the federal level, because the government, has been very willing to spend large sums of money in this period of time to provide all kinds of supports. And I mean, you might say that, for instance, that the amount of money they've allocated to childcare across the country is less than the amount of money they were prepared to allocate to that WE contract for volunteerism. So this is a government that has staked its reputation, Justin Trudeau, Katie Telford, a lot of others, on feminism, on being a feminist government. How can you be a feminist government and not charge up the hill with this flag?
I think that childcare, of course, is at the core of any gender equality approach. So I have long said that childcare is the policy lever, the magic lever that needs to be pressed federally and, of course, provincially in order to achieve those goals. And certainly I've been on record as critical of the federal government, especially in their 2018 the gender budget. You'll recall that that needed, in my view, at that point, pre-pandemic, needed significantly more investments in building a system. So I think that I would really like to see our policy legacy that comes out of this be a social infrastructure-led recovery that includes childcare centrally. So I'm not trying to be uncritical. I do take some umbrage or solace in the fact that there are really clear signals, I think, that I'm hearing that there is a significant federal appetite for building a childcare system. But signals aren't substance, and I would really like to see, in the shortest possible term, the Promised Childcare Secretariat established to and be at the center of government in like a pandemic step-down planning. If we're going to be serious about a social infrastructure, childcare centered recovery, then that kind of policy knowledge needs to be at the center of government and needs to be part of our stimulus and recovery planning, that needs to go into our budget making process, that needs to do all of those other things that are the mechanics of government. It's not childcare is, as you say, it's a complicated field, and the investments accrue over time. So right now we're really focused on the crisis, and while we need to focus on the crisis, our eye needs to be on the prize. That's the 5-year out. How do we create the kind of stability that we all need so we don't end up here again? And part of that is building that architecture. So I think what I'm looking for is both of those things at once. And I really think we need to start thinking about the system building. We're in crisis and we need to respond to the immediate crisis, but we really need to think about system building and the kind of allocations that that's going to require. And also preparing our collective appetites for more spending, because we haven't even gotten to stimulus. We haven't gotten to stimulus spending. We've just been doing crisis spending, and this is going to take some time and some doing.
We've been talking mostly about the fairness of this issue and about the pressure on families. But also in your paper, you make the point that the recovery for everybody can't be as strong as we want it to be unless we address this problem. What are some of the sectors that cannot get back to normal unless women come back to work? Hospitality, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
Retail, probably.
And, so the sectors where women have been significantly represented, of course, are the broader service sector. And as you indicate, they've been particularly hard hit. And it is unclear how and what that recovery will look like. So my spouse is in the restaurant industry. It's a sector that I think has sort of struggled through summer, but in some ways has managed to create a model that, at least while it's nice out, there's potential for some stability. I don't know what we do when we have a nation that's 7 months of the year freezing cold and we're all inside. And it is incredibly vulnerable. So I think we have to also anticipate that there may be segments of the economy that may not recover the way they were before. And we need to think about a different kind of strategy, especially around employment. And of course, we know that the social services sector and the para-public sector is one in which women are often significantly represented, in which there's a significant opportunity for increased employment. So part of our recovery strategy can also be an employment strategy that is a social infrastructure-led recovery, let's say, since we're talking about it, childcare, but that also includes a labor force training strategy that hopefully also considers the kind of pay structure that we've traditionally allocated to that care sector, which has not been the most lucrative.
Right. But I go back to that being all April. To me, the water is, the tide is flowing out on all of that we've got to change everything and be more compassionate and recognize who we value and all that. I don't really hear people talking like that anymore.
No, that was short-lived, wasn't it? I know.
Yeah, it really was really was short-lived. So the government now has an explicit economic policy that the CERB is ending, and they want people to transition from the CERB onto the wage subsidy, implying that they need to get out of the fucking house and go back to work. Right? Again, how is that possible without this linkage?
It's not. I mean, it's baffling. It from a public policy perspective, it's absolutely baffling that could be the conclusion that's drawn. And yet, what is absolutely clear is the whole thing hinges on an assumption that there are people, and it's usually women, who are simply going to find ways to accommodate, whether it's, doing all of your work from 11 o'clock at night till 3 a.m, whether it's, finding the cheapest possible care that, by the way, is probably not the best care, whether it's putting your grandparents at risk by saying, here, take care of my kids. So it relies on this kind of reserve army of unpaid, largely female labor, and the hope that it will simply marshal its resources because it doesn't have a choice. And of course, it's quite a self-defeating prospect, because what the end of that particular story is significant labor market decline and significant labor market exit. Mothers in Canadian families represent 40% of household spending power. So just on that alone, if you reduce a significant percentage of that household spending power, you stunt, stall, make almost impossible the kind of economic recovery that you want. And even further, you reduce the tax base that's going to help pay for all of this stuff that we've been, trying to backstop and done, a decent job of through pandemic. So it's self-defeating in the short term, it's self-defeating in the long term, and it is an absolute disservice to all of us to not take that seriously and do something about it. And not just do something about it, but put the money, the resources, the planning, and the pivoting, the flexibility on the table and say, we've said we'll do whatever it takes, so let's do whatever it takes.
You are a sociologist.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. You're a sociologist. I took enough sociology in university to say the following things to you. Durkheim, Weber,
yes,
Robert King Merton. That's it. Yes. That's all I know.
That's fine. We're not going to talk about functionalism anyway.
What are the class implications of this?
Oh. Yeah, they're big. I mean, all the economic crises, I think, reveal the kind of inequalities and fissures that pre-existed. They get highlighted in crisis. A health crisis reveals those in all kinds of ways, and they're similar, but the consequences are perhaps more immediately visible. So we see the kind of social determinants of health, especially along the lines of income inequality, determine who fares well in health terms as a result of this kind of crisis. The kind of economic consequences are similar. They parallel that. So I think that we have certain areas that we can undergird that allow people to have the opportunity whether to work or to learn or to care. And those are collective responsibilities that can ward off some of the really negative, precarious class consequences of the effects of this kind of crisis. I think that those families, if we're speaking specifically about childcare, those families who are well-resourced are going to be fine. They're going to figure out how to use the market system and pay for what kind of services, whatever services they need. For families who are not well-resourced and who would already be struggling to pay for childcare and whose labor market prospects have been made much more stark, you're going to see...
You mean, by which you mean 80% of the population?
Yeah, I mean 80% of the population. So you're going to see families make decisions about who's going to stay in the labor market and who's not going to stay in the labor market. You're going to see the result of that is likely going to be a lot of women and mothers exiting the labor market as a result of this. And what you then see is an increase in lifetime risk of poverty. You see return to work for mothers with significant motherhood penalties in their wages as a result of that exit. You see that they have very few pension contributions, so that, when they're older, they are poorer. And in the shorter term, the risk to kids is that they have, lower incomes and all of the attendant issues that flow from that. So in my view, it's kind of it is a foregone conclusion that getting this wrong, it's already an unequal playing field, and getting it wrong in terms of school and childcare will only deepen and entrench that.
We're running out of time, Kate. I want to ask you if, in conclusion, this was so much fun. So much fun. What a great person you are to talk to.
Aw, you're lovely too.
I am having a lot of fun. It's rarely said. What should a parent be doing right now?
Oh, well, I mean, I think it sort of depends. I think, I think right now, I hope parents, and many of whom are also employees and employers, should be talking about what they need. And what they need is predictable and safe restart of schools. They need some kind of articulated plan. And whatever that plan is, that it includes really aggressive attempts to find the spaces and the supports that are needed to make sure that the 4 to 12-year-olds can be in school, and be in school as full-time as possible. And if they can't be there full-time, that we have aggressively put in place the alternatives for them, so that those kids can receive and stay in quality care that hopefully is also affordable to those parents, so that those parents can be in work. I think that this needs to remain until we get any kind of fix for it, the number one issue that the parents be talking to other parents, to their local counselors, to their MPPs, to their MPs about, and to school boards and to school trustees, because this is not an easy fix for governments to figure out, but not doing it is the worst possible outcome for kids, for parents, and for the economy. How's that?
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, it's great. It's great. And my last words to you are, you're a very, very compelling advocate. And this is your moment.
You.
Drop the Marcus of Queensbury rules. Take the gloves off. Go out and fight for this thing.
Well, I really appreciate the backstop and the support.
Thank you for coming on. I'm sure everybody learned a lot. I appreciate your time so much. And thank you for writing the piece. My thanks to Andrew and Monica as well.
Absolutely. And it's lovely meeting you virtually.
Absolutely. Take care. Enjoy the cottage.
Take it easy.
Bye. If we've learned anything over the past few weeks, it's that in times of crisis, governments matter. So if you've never heard of Queen's Park Today, it's one of Ontario's most trusted news sources for political insiders and for people who actually need to know what is happening at the legislature every day. Whether it affects your business, your stakeholders, or the health and safety of your family, Queen's Park Today is tracking the ongoing developments in Ontario. The newsletter lands in your inbox first thing every morning, so you can start your day off already ahead of the game. During a crisis, the importance of governments increases dramatically. The only way to really get the detailed boots-on-the-ground coverage you need is by subscribing to Queen's Park Today. There's also BC Today and Alberta Today, which are great for people who want to know what's going on out west, but don't have the time to follow it closely. To get a free 2-week trial of Queen's Park Today, BC Today, or Alberta Today, go to politicstoday.news and hit the free trial button. That's politicstoday.news/free trial. All right, Herle Burlyites, here I am. Jenni Byrne, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm excellent. I can't see your full jersey. What are you wearing?
I am wearing an Expos jersey, no number on the back, but borrowed it from my dad.
Surely if they were still playing, they'd have been allowed into Canada, right? The Expos. I mean, not the Jays, but the Expos.
Well, one would hope, I guess.
Yeah. Favorite Expo of all time?
Tim Wallach.
Tim Wallach. Why?
I love third base.
Oh, well, there you go. And he was a good one. He was a
He
very
was
good
good.
one. I'm an Ellis Valentine guy myself. Yeah.
I liked him and Tom Foley played second base at the same time, and I love that combination of the two of them.
I loved all those Expo teams. I remember sitting in the driving rain outside of Gull Lake, Saskatchewan, listening to Blue Monday on the radio. Very memorable moment for me. Anyway, we got to get a pod going here, and
Yes.
I wanted to start because I've gotten some feedback on social media about the fact that we stopped book recommendations. So I have a book recommendation today, and it's called Both My Houses: From Politics to Priesthood by Sean O'Sullivan. Sean O'Sullivan was, at the time, the youngest MP ever elected to Parliament at the age of 20 out of Hamilton as a progressive conservative. He was a very, very popular in the House of Commons, seen as a great House of Commons person, and then left for the priesthood. And then I have a great story about Sean O'Sullivan from John Turner, which is after he went to the priesthood, he developed chemotherapy. He developed leukemia, and he was in chemo and all that, and things were going very, very badly. And John Turner got a call that Sean O'Sullivan was on his last legs, and they were administering the last rites to him. So he flies out of his office, grabs a bottle of scotch, which was probably handy, and heads out to the airport to see Sean O'Sullivan. And the nuns let him into the room, and he goes in to see Sean, and Sean's in bad shape. And Turner says to Sean O'Sullivan, "Sean, they tell me you're going to die." And Sean O'Sullivan says, "Yeah." Turner says, "Do you want to die?" Sean says, "No, I don't want to die." And so they crack this bottle of scotch, and they start telling stories and kibitzing. And the nuns can't believe what they're hearing from outside the from outside the room. What's going on in there? And finally, Turner comes out, and the nuns who hadn't seen the bottle of scotch go in, the nuns say, "Mr. Turner, what happened in there? It's like a complete change in the guy. He's got all kinds of life, and he's animated, and we haven't seen him like that in such a long time." And Turner looks at the nuns and says, "Sister, never underestimate the power of prayer."
That's a great story. Well, there's one of the nicest rooms in the House of Commons, the Sean O'Sullivan prayer room in East Block. It's a beautiful room.
Anyway, there's a good book for people to catch up on. Sorry, I was on mute. I'm still an amateur at this, Jenni. So I thought that conversation with Kate was pretty interesting. What do you think?
It was very interesting. It was very interesting. I enjoyed listening to it.
So what do you think is going to happen here? Are you anticipating that provinces are going to step up with a lot of money to supplement the federal money on childcare, or will the feds ultimately bring more money to the table, or are we not going to address this problem in a serious way?
Well, I think it's got to be addressed, but I think there's two different things. Like I believe that, and you know, I say this as not being a parent. There seems to be a lot of equating school with childcare spaces, and are they not two different things? Because this is the debates that I'm hearing of my friends that have kids is yes, childcare for when they go back to work, when they're, you know, seriously, people go back to work, I think, which will be after kind of Labor Day, is an issue. But the problem is that people that are right now, this hybrid model, at least here in Ontario, that people are talking about, is basically your kid goes to school every other day, and then on the days that they don't go to school, they're expected to do kind of the e-learning, the online learning. And so it's not just a childcare question. It's what are parents going to do with their kids on the days that they're not actually in the classroom, because they're still expected to seemingly do school. So I think the question it remains to be is, there is an expectation by parents across the country that there is going to be a thought given as to how kids can go to school 5 days a week. Because if now people can get in gatherings of 50, seemingly government should be able to figure out a way that kids can go to school 5 days a week.
Well, I just don't know how it works, Jenni, without that, right? Like without school and the childcare services people need, it's just functional. Like, what would you do as a parent? You have no choice.
Well, and I think, as I said, my friends that have kids, they've been they got through like kind of March, April, May, June. They got through the 3 months of being able to juggle, and employers were very accommodating. I think it's going to change, and we've talked about the economy. We've talked about how I think private sector is going to go through a bit of a restructuring, but I think that is going to change. So the parents muddling, like I know one of my best friends' wife, she's in a job where she has to log on to her computer every day. So like her job is it's not as flexible. So for her, she's doing, she was doing the e-learning and looking after the kids. And then basically after the kids went to bed at 8 o'clock, she was putting in another 4 hours of work. And that's just not sustainable for people.
That isn't sustainable, but those people at least have that option. What if you're a waitress?
True.
Right? And the restaurant opens and the serve is over and you have to go back to work, and there's no 5 day a week school and no childcare. Like, you're unemployed. Like, you're just going to be, now you're poor.
Agreed. No, I 100% agree. And these are the questions. Like, this is the expectation that we've had with governments, and that's been disappointing at all levels of government. Is these are the kind of things that they should have been thinking about months ago. It's been more of, for all levels, where governments are. I could see for the first month and a half where you're like, it's day by day. Every day you get up and you're just trying to figure it, like you're trying to get through kind of the day. But that kind of ended as life started to go back to normal, or we started to at least adapt to where we are right now. And I've been very disappointed by governments at all levels as to there's been no long-term planning. So like, we're already almost at the end of July. School is supposed to start in 6 weeks, and there seemingly there's been announcements made, but there's been no planning as to like how kids are going to go back to school.
No, and people must be in full-fledged panic about it.
Any friend or family that I've talked to that have kids, they absolutely are in full-fledged panic about it.
Right. So as the summer goes on, the politics of this are going to get really hot, presumably.
Agree. I think very much so, because it continues to be such. This is something that affects people's day to day. And to your point, it's not just about their kids. And we talk about it's the economy. It's so people want to go back to work. They have to go back to work. But it's also not just mental health of parents, but mental health of kids. Like as I said, I've talked to friends and family who said their kids have really retreated. They've become shells of themselves. And I think we've talked about this because they're having no interaction with other kids. And it's hard to explain to them why, they can't hug their grandparents or they can't visit their cousins. And so it's a very, or why they haven't seen their friends or gone on play dates. So I think there's all of these factors that governments, they need to consider when they're figuring out what parents do come the Tuesday after Labor Day.
Right. I mean, I don't know that this announcement can wait much longer because, people need to plan.
Agreed.
Anyway, last week last week, not to take anything away from this week's discussion, which is extremely important in the very short term for people. But last week I had a fascinating conversation with David Mulroney about Canada-China relations. And that has some real serious long-term implications for us. First of all, do you agree with him about the fact that we've got to become much more hard-headed about our relationship with China and understand, be more clear-eyed about what our strategic interests are in that relationship?
I completely agree, and I thought the conversation last week with David was very good. It was he is a very smart guy, and I thought it was I very much enjoyed, and I agree with that. I think that if you look at countries like Australia, for example, they've really and they're very dependent. They're on China, not just in terms of trade, but also proximity. They've taken a very pragmatic strategic approach with China. So, for example, they're the first country to call on the fact that there should be an investigation into COVID and the coronavirus and in terms of its origin. They're also a country that there are 12 million less people in Australia, and they spend $20 billion more a year in terms of their military to make sure they're secure. And that's one of the things that David was saying on the podcast last week, is that we have depended on the U.S. For a long time in terms of our security, but Canada needs to become more self-sufficient. It's not that we will still benefit from being the northern neighbors to a global superpower, but we actually have to become more self-sufficient. It's not enough. It's not enough just to rely on them. So I thought those were very interesting and obviously speaks to an obvious relationship with, or an obvious dynamic with China.
Yeah, how do you feel about the economic financial trade-off? I mean, he said explicitly that there is a price for sovereignty and we should be prepared to pay it, even if that means fewer exports to China, or even if that means more expensive imports from other jurisdictions are impacted. I don't know how that would go over if we had the Japanese. I just saw today, this morning, have some very, very large subsidy program now to encourage Japanese companies to take their production out of China and bring it back to Japan. I mean, that means that all of our consumer goods are going to become more expensive. Our economies have become quite enmeshed. It'd be interesting to see whether people are prepared to prioritize international relationships, political sovereignty, and long-term security for that kind of economic cost.
Well, it'll be to your point. It'll be interesting to see. That doesn't prevent, though, the government. That doesn't prevent the Canadian government from at least anticipating that that's the case. And you're seeing more of the Five Eyes countries going in that direction. I think Canada is the only country now to not say that Huawei isn't going to be the 5G network, and in fact in London they're going to have to start ripping out the in Britain the cell phone tower, the 5G towers. So I think that eventually you're going to see other countries. It's not just going to be a Canada only approach. You're going to see other countries, as I said, the five eyes moving in the same direction.
So David Mulroney said that the argument for Huawei and our 5G network had vanished. And I know that you had always linked our position on Huawei to the government's search for the Security Council seat. Now that that's over, what do you think the delay is in Canada on making the Huawei decision? Do they think that something even worse would happen to the two Michaels if they made that announcement clear?
I don't know. I'm not sure why they are. I'm not sure why they're so far behind what our allies are. I'd like
surely they've made this decision and just not announced it, right, Jenni? I mean, surely the government's made this decision.
But then why not announce it?
I don't know.
You would think they made it. I'm not sure why they wouldn't announce it, though. I'd like to think there's some strategic reason behind it, but it could just also be they just haven't gotten around to making the announcement.
Right.
They've been pretty busy these days, and I'm sure we're going to get into talking about we and the Gilberts.
I'm just ragging the puck, Jenni. I'm just ragging the puck. No, but the Liberal Party has. So when I think about why they might not have made this announcement, the Liberal Party has within it powerful interests and powerful people who are big fans of China. And in fact, the government's appointment of Dominic Barton was a further continuation, as the ambassador to China, was a further continuation down the road of let's integrate our economies and let's do a lot of business together and let's do all this. And that is the view, that was certainly the view of Mr. Chrétien, and that is been the view of a lot of powerful liberals over time. So we have within our party a division about this issue. Do you, in the Conservative Party, have a division about this issue?
No.
No?
No. Well, listen, it was.
Do you expect
it
it to become a partisan thing? I've seen a lot of its messaging in the Conservative leadership. Do you think that messaging will leak out into a general?
I think it very well could leak out to a general. I think what we'll see. It'll be interesting to see how much China and messaging around China plays in the American election as we kind of head into the last few months of that. So it's possible it does. I'm not sure where the Liberal Party is now. Like if you look at the list of what the 29 eminent Canadians that signed the letter about the prisoner swap, so to speak. You've got, I think Chrétien signed it. John Manley definitely signed it. He was one of the most high-profile people to have signed it. You guys do have divisions.
Chrétien didn't sign it, and Manley wasn't asked. But Lloyd Axworthy signed it, and Alan Rock signed it, and yeah. It's going to be something for the Liberal Party to come to grips with. I'm not sure it's good for this to be an issue of partisan division. I would personally rather that we developed a national consensus around our approach to China, because it's going to require a series of alliances around the world to effectively counter China's position in the world and to have our own economic and military bulwark against that. And it's obviously not helpful if that relationship is up for debate every election. So I think it would be better if we had a national consensus about this rather than it being a constant point of division.
But isn't the ball in the Liberal government's court right now? They're the ones that can't even make a basic decision on Huawei. So the ball is in their court in terms of having a discussion on this, and it's seemingly that they do not want to do that.
I think that they don't want to have that discussion right now, but I think that's a discussion in the country that needs to happen.
Well, if I was in the Prime Minister's office, I'd probably rather have a discussion on China right now than I would on we.
All right, I don't want to hold you back any longer.
Have my subtle hints finally?
That was so artful. That was so artful. It was so artful. I just have to go with it. So the Finance Committee started last week. Pierre Poilievre, I thought, was very effective leading it off. What did we learn from the Finance Committee, Jenni?
Well, what we learned, and I think, David, we talked about this on CBC that night, is what we learned is that I actually can admit when I've made a mistake. I all along thought this was a Liberal government program designed to help we, when it turns out it was actually a we-designed program to help we. They were the ones that what we learned was they were the ones that proactively and it's as clear as mud. So what we've seen is it seems that in the first week of April or the second week of April, we reached out to the federal government about a program, not the Canada Student Grant Program, but a different program. Cabinet started talking about having the Canada Summer Student Grant Program. Some unnamed person in the finance department, and it's very vague. So we will assume that the fact that Rachel Wernick was so, Rachel Wernick, I think, was so vague on it, that obviously it was because she was so vague on it, was obviously suggested by someone, an exempt staffer, a political staffer in finance in Morneau's office, suggested to the bureaucrats that we be the one to deliver this. She calls the Kielburgers, has a discussion, and they're able to turn around, flip a proposal back to the government a day later to administer a $1 billion program. So that's on the surface what we found out at the Finance Committee.
Okay, well, what's the scandal?
What do you mean, what's the scandal?
What's the scandal? So they had an organization they thought would do a good job of this. They directed a contract to that organization, and
they sold
a legitimate. Yeah,
but they didn't do any. But they didn't do any due diligence or research to see if some other organization could deliver the same program. And frankly, as I've said, the Canada Summer Jobs Program delivers 70,000 jobs to students across the country every year. They could have given that program a top-up of funding and to administer another 20,000 jobs, because one of the things we also found out is that we originally thought a week ago that we was going to get $21.5 million to administer this program. But when the Minister Bardish Chagger testified on Thursday at the Finance Committee, we found out that actually the money going to we would be in excess to $43.5 million. So it keeps going that this government continues to mislead and lie about the details around this program because they know that they were in the wrong.
Okay, and I want to say two things to you, though. First of all, in fairness, and I don't know these Kielburger, never met them, and suspect I wouldn't like them. But in fairness to these Kielburgers, they didn't. I mean, it's when you say they were going to get 19 or going to get 43. I've been the victim of this kind of media reporting of contracts before, where there are enormous costs embedded. But the way everybody reads it is that that's your profit. That's what you made. No, that's what they were getting to to compensate them for administering the whole program. So it's not like they were putting $19 or $43 million in their pocket. This was all going to be spent on the administration of this program. Yes? No?
Okay. Will you say that with 100% certainty? Because the Liberal government can't even do that, David.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm assuming that's the case because when people say I got a contract for $1 million of research, and I know that 800,000 of that was data collection, and in the other 200,000 we had to spend hundreds of hours analyzing data, I know that I didn't put $1 million in my pocket.
Okay, but this is seemingly
right? That's how these things get reported. But
so this is a charity that's been sole sourced to administer a program that would provide 20,000 jobs, like 20,000 jobs for $43.5 million. They absolutely were making a profit. That's the only reason they were doing it. And we could go back into the fact that financial relationships between the government and the fact that members of the Prime Minister's immediate family all received hundreds of thousands of dollars from this organization, and the finance minister's daughter works currently for the organization, and it was his office that seemingly suggested to the bureaucrats that we be used. I think it absolutely does not pass the sniff test.
Okay, so my second line of defense is you got people sitting at home not knowing if they're ever going to get a job back, not knowing if their kids are going to be able to go to school, not knowing if there's going to be a second wave and get sick. much less all the other things that are going on. One group got a contract through a process that wasn't fully competitive. Who gives a shit? Really? Who gives a shit?
I think people will give a shit because for the reasons that you just said, people are sitting, they are in flux financially. It is going to be very, very murky waters ahead in terms of the economy over the next 6 months, if not and longer. And you have a government who, in the throes of a crisis, basically decided to award a contract, a $43.5 million contract to administer a $1 billion program, and they awarded it to their friends who pay members of this government's immediate family. I actually think people care very much about this because the government is doing something that other people, like, they are awarding friends and family while people are actually suffering. So that's why I think people care. This is the first scandal that this government, let's be honest, this prime minister has been dinged twice, has been found to have ethical lapses by the ethics commissioner twice before, SNC-Lavalin and the vacation on the private island of the Aga Khan. This is the first time, though, that I truly believe this matters, because this is people understand exactly what this is. As they sit and suffer during a pandemic, the prime minister is awarding a contract to his millionaire friends who have paid his mother, his brother, and his wife in the past before.
I've done some research in the past on scandals and ethical issues and how they're perceived by the public. And the ones that get really serious, the ones that anger people, are the ones in which there's a financial gain on the part of the politician, in which there's money changing hands. That's what, for example, made the sponsorship issue more potent than the gas plant issue in Ontario, because nobody could see any financial benefit to McGuinty or anybody in the Liberal government from the gas plant scandal. So this one, I mean, Trudeau doesn't benefit from this. How is this going to change the way people think about Trudeau? I mean, his argument is, I was just trying to get a good program done. You say he gave it to his friends, but they weren't his friends who were running a Greek restaurant on the Danforth. They were his friends who ran a charity that could conceivably pull this off.
Yeah, but he may not have personally benefited from it, but his family did. His mother made over $200,000 in speaking engagements. And let's not even talk about the expenses that probably are associated with that. It'd be interesting to see, what hotels, for example, the entourage for We stayed at when for their last event when they were in London in the first week of May. And I think that the high profileness of We and the Kielburgers, because they've been in every high school and do what have you, the fact that there's now a separate scandal, which is unrelated, but coming to light. So I'm sure the Kielburgers, if they could go back 3 months ago, would have not called up whoever they did in the government and shill for this program, probably would have preferred not to, because now what's coming to light is all of these real estate transactions. So on the surface, they're a nonprofit charity that has at least $47 million in real estate assets. And what we're seeing now is this very unusual practice of basically every 6 months, them selling it between different family members and people associated with We. And so that would be, one would do that for tax evasion. I'm sure that there are probably people looking at that. But what's going to be problematic for the Liberal government is, because of the high profile nature of We, this separate scandal that they're dealing with is going to keep it in the press for the Liberal government. And we've seen the Liberals are obviously upset about it, because they've been filibustering the ethics committee. And next week, we're actually going to see the Kielburgers are actually going to be coming and testifying at the finance committee. So Pierre Poilievre and Peter Julian and Charlie Angus are going to have a chance to actually question them directly. And I know I'm being long-winded, David, so I'll let you, because I know you really want to chat about this. What you've seen now is now a division between we and the Liberal government. So if you've seen the statements that we have put out, they're definitely trying to distance themselves in terms of the decisions made by the government. What is the saying? There is no honor among thieves. So we'll see how this continues over the next couple weeks of committee testimony. But I think it's fascinating, and I think that this is something the Liberals are not going to be able to shy away from.
Just this morning, we was cutting the government loose on the criteria for the program. How much people were to get paid? They said we didn't determine that. We got told that, right?
Yeah.
How much people got paid. So they're starting to defend their own interests. But yeah, they're having a terrible outing as an organization. And I can tell you from 30 years of consulting, live by the public sector dollar, die by the public sector dollar.
Exactly.
It's not a great way to make a living over the long term, generally. So let's say it's bad. Let's say it's as bad as you say it is. And you're in that office. What do you do now? So your first line of defense that it was recommended by the bureaucracy, let's say that doesn't hold. Didn't hold great on Thursday, but didn't collapse, but it didn't hold great last Thursday.
It's not holding because if it was recommended by the bureaucracy, they would have had a more fulsome defense. I think the Liberals had a very bad day on committee on Thursday, but they would release it. If this was recommended, having lived through government for years, the bureaucrats put everything in writing. Whether you agree with it, whether you don't agree with it, they put it in writing, and there is no chance that if they were recommending the delivery of a $1 billion program, that they would not put it in writing. Like, it wasn't going to just be a general conversation as, like, you walk to the water cooler in Longevon or the Prime Minister's office. This was going to be a thought out, like, paper, like, big memo from PCO. So there is no way this was recommended by the bureaucrats. I think everyone is past that point now.
So Wernick said that it was not the job of the officials to warn politicians about conflicts of interest, about personal conflicts of interest. That got when she said that, I watched it and I thought, yeah, that's right. That's the political staff's job. That's not the bureaucracy's job. But I've seen a lot of pushback against that idea publicly. A lot of people saying, of course it is the bureaucrats' job to point out those kinds of things to the minister and protect them from themselves. What do you think about that? Would you have expected the bureaucracy to try to protect the government on the conflict side?
You would think it would come up, because I'm assuming that the bureaucracy probably didn't like the program the way that it was structured, so they would find any way possible to try to shut it down. But come on, like, this isn't like you needed a forensic accountant to go in and, like, figure out that there was conflicts. These the Trudeaus have spoken at these events for, like, dozens and dozens of these events. So if the Prime Minister himself is so obtuse that he didn't actually see the problem, and I think it's arrogance that he didn't see it, and nobody in his office basically put up their hand to say this is a problem, and nobody in cabinet during this discussion did, like, there is no ethical wall or bureaucrat that could have changed this. They decided to proceed with this knowing there absolutely was conflict of interest. Like, if the finance minister sat there and thought, there is no conflict here because I have a daughter that works for we, and my other daughter was associated with them in the past. The fact that nobody stood up and said that speaks to arrogance. It doesn't speak to the fact that they didn't know what was happening. They didn't know about the connections. They just didn't care.
Well, I think, to be honest, I have a harder view of that, because I think that anybody that's worked with Mr. Trudeau would come to understand how unwelcome dissent is, and how that would be, if you'd put your hand up at cabinet and said, I think you're too close to them, I think that people would know better than to do that.
So all the people that said that Stephen Harper was controlling, obviously, because having worked with Stephen Harper, he was absolutely fine with dissent. He was fine with cabinet ministers and caucus. Like, I sat through caucus meetings where caucus would come up and they would disagree with a certain position the government was taking, and they would disagree, like, with the prime minister in front of the rest of caucus, and he would have a discussion with them. It was welcome among that government. So all those people that said that about Harper, where are they now talking then about the control that obviously this prime minister has, and the fact that he doesn't like dissenting opinions?
Yeah, well, that may be part of the follow-up. So back to my question of, you're in this situation. You're the deputy chief of staff or the chief of staff. What your line didn't hold. You have to fall back to a new line. You pretty much have to use a new fact to take a new action. So what's going to come out that's going to allow them to redefine their line of defense? And doesn't it probably involve throwing somebody overboard?
Probably. Listen, I don't know the details as to what I said 2 weeks ago when we discussed this, that I would have probably gotten all the details out 2 weeks ago and it would have been shitty, but I would have pushed it all out at once and, throw mud at the wall and see what sticks. And if you throw out enough information, it's hard for people to fully see everything where it is. I think you're going to definitely see someone thrown overboard. I think it's going to be hard to throw a bureaucrat overboard, because I think that probably the bureaucrats do not have there's no paper trail that's going to lead this decision back to the bureaucrats. So I think if you're looking at a minister, if I was Bardish Chagger or Bill Murneau right now, I would be very nervous in my positions, because those, I think, are the two exposed. Bardish Chagger, because her ministry implemented the program, or she was the one, I guess, who signed the memorandum to cabinet, the MC. And Bill Murneau, because seemingly it's coming to light that his office was the one that his ministry was the one that suggested it. So I think one of those two would be they're in a very precarious position right now.
Yeah, on Power and Politics with you, I quoted a great line from Bill Fox, which is, somebody shouldn't be buying green bananas right now.
You did?
I don't know how it could be Bardish Chagger. I thought she was as clear as she could possibly be in her testimony that she had nothing to do with this whatsoever. Not the design of the program, not the decision who got it, the contract, not anything. She was.
Yeah, but her signature was on the memorandum to cabinet, so she made the decision. So this speaks to the issue that you were saying, that no one wants to stand up and say, Emperor, you have no clothes on. The fact is, Bardish Chagger signed the MC. She was the one that technically took it to cabinet. So if she had a problem with it, she should have called up the Prime Minister's office, or should have called up the PM and said, I am not signing this. If you guys want it, you guys have someone else do the MC, because she could have easily done that.
Profiles and courage. Okay, are we done with we, or do you have more?
No, listen, I'll give it to you, David. You're fine. I'll let you off from having to talk about it some more.
What do you think? What do you think the opposition's looking for out of the Kielburgers on Monday?
Well, listen, I think they're going to. I think what they're going to do is they're going to drill down in terms of what they talked to Wernick and Chagger about, in terms of the timing of the announcement, kind of who did what when, is I think where they're going to go, and we'll see if any of the opposition parties want to actually touch on the real estate thing. But if I were them, I think there's a whole scandal in the real estate thing, and I think people could go to jail for it based on any of the reporting. Brian Lilly's been leading it, and other media are on it. I think that people could go to jail, but if I'm the opposition, I want to continue to focus on the program with the federal government.
Well, it could be interesting as hell, because they, we noted earlier that they seem to be cutting some distance between themselves and the government. They're in the fight of their lives for their charity now. Like, their whole enterprise is in trouble.
I think their charity.
So
their charity's done. Like,
their interests and the government's interests are quite diverging now. Like, they have a real need to protect their reputation. I presume they're not going to be carrying any water for the government.
I don't think they will. I think their reputation is almost gone. If I assume that where the Kielburgers' head is at now is they want to make sure that they protect their corporate interests because that's ultimately where they make the money. We Charity transfers money to the Kielburgers' corporate interests, and the corporate interests do not transfer back to the charity. I think the charity's done. I think that they've already announced all their Canadian operations and the We Days and all that fucking bullshit. That's all done. That they're focusing more on their operations in their charity in Africa. But my guess is it's only a matter of time before that wraps up as well. I think where the Kielburgers are is they want to make sure they don't go to jail and they want to make sure they don't lose all their money. And so therefore they don't care about protecting this government.
Right. All right. Well, we will await Monday with great interest. Assuming that we have to wait till Monday for new news. It's impossible. The news comes out every day, so it's impossible that we'll have to wait for Monday for new news on this.
I cannot wait until next week when we get to talk about it.
Maybe I'll be on vacation next week. Like my erstwhile friends who keep ducking out. Jenni, did you watch the Chris Wallace interview with Donald Trump?
I watched some of it. I did watch some of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to say, and I maybe am tainted because I look at everything as the lens of a former political staffer. I cannot imagine a worse job in the world in terms of what we used to do with our lives is working for Donald Trump. I think working for him would be a miserable experience.
So you're referring to the fact that nobody would have recommended he go out and do that interview, and probably nobody would have recommended that he do a cognitive test or brag about his results on the cognitive test. These kinds of things.
Or 3 times during the interview, like snap to have his press secretary bring him stats to back up some claim that he made.
Get me the death chart. Get me the death chart, he says. Jesus Christ. Anyway, Jenni, that's so interesting that you would raise that, though, because I wanted to ask you that question. So there's a theory in Canada that among the kinds of people of all the political parties that I hang around with, that if the prime minister asks you to serve, you would serve. Like if the prime minister was to say to you, I want you to come into the office and do this function, that pretty much no matter where you are in your professional life, you drop that and you go serve your country at the request of the prime minister. What would you do if you were an American equivalent of yourself and you were asked to go into the White House right now?
Well, I may be honored to go work in the White House, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure I would. Like, if I'm not sure it's like if people. Listen, it would be hard. It would be hard. Listen, as a political junkie, as someone who most of my adult life I did this, it's easy for me to say, oh no, I probably wouldn't. But if actually asked, it is a pretty big honor. I'm not sure at this point. Like, I think that, 6 months ago, my opinion, was different because I think the U.S. was in a much different position. As I've said, like the unemployment rate was at 3%, the lowest in, I think in American history, at least in decades. And so I think Trump was poised for a re-election. I think that COVID has put a wrench in that for him, and he has not risen to the occasion, so to speak. So I'm not. Listen, it would be easy to say I wouldn't do it, but as a political person, it would be hard to turn. It would be hard to say no if you're asked to come and serve your country.
Well, yeah, and you'd like to think maybe that you could make some sort of difference, but it does appear, as you said, as if really you'd just be an interchangeable cog, and you'd be there for 3 months until he got tired of you asking him not to do stupid things, and you got shuffled aside and fired, probably in disgrace, over the thing.
Listen, one of the best traits of a good political staffer is self-awareness. And if you're going into a job like that, you realize you're not changing things. You're just trying to make things less bad. Right.
So I was 12 when Watergate happened, and I don't really have a clear recollection of it. But when I see Chris Wallace on Fox TV literally mocking Trump, as he did, especially over the cognitive test, but on a couple of other things too.
93.
such a great line. His allies are now pretty marginal. Like, I have not seen a president, I've not seen a political leader this isolated in any circumstance now from almost all elite establishment type of opinion of any kind.
Yeah, I don't think in my lifetime I've ever seen I've ever seen a leader kind of as isolated as what he is. And listen, it's never good. We all kind of joke that poor Brad Parscale was going to take the bullet eventually, and he's gone. So 4 months out of an election, it's never good to fire your campaign manager. So I think he is.
That's what I told Kathleen. That's what I told Kathleen. I said that's what I told Kathleen. 4 months out, don't fire your campaign manager. Never looks good.
So he seems very isolated. He seems very isolated now, and so I can't see it. I can't see it getting any better. He just seems very tone deaf on most issues.
Yeah, there's a lot of time left in any political circumstance. There's a lot of time left between now and November, but boy, it's getting hard to see the path.
Yes. The best thing he has going for him is the fact that Joe Biden is, I think, a terrible candidate for the Democrats. It still will be interesting to see who his vice presidential pick is, but the only thing going for Trump is the fact that Biden is so bad and seemingly getting worse. It seems the stress on his political staff is how do you run this guy for president of the United States and like not put him in front of the cameras or let him talk to anybody. Like it's the opposite problem of that you're dealing with Trump. If you're working on his campaign, you're like, how do we do this and people not see not actually have to see him or hear from him.
Yeah, now Trump's obviously getting super frustrated that Biden won't come out to fight, won't come in the ring and fight with him. Because, I mean, we said there's no clear path, no obvious path for Trump, and there isn't. But whatever path there is, does not in any way, I don't think, entail making people think Trump is a different person than they've thought he is to date, because that's impossible. I think for that segment of the population that he's lost from 2016, he needs to make them think that he needs to make them hate Biden as much as they hated Hillary. He needs to make them think that Biden is worse than they've come to believe that he is. So he ultimately needs to get Biden in the ring and have him come out to fight. But I mean, the Democratic strategy is perfect right now.
Well, but we'll see how long they can be sustainable. Like he is running for president, so the once a week Zoom interviews from his basement just aren't going to cut it. And even those that he's done, there's been in the last few months we've talked about it. There's been ones where he just seems kind of out of it. That he doesn't like it's. He's not someone that's cognitively seems to have the ability to run for president of the United States. So it's going to be a challenge the Democrats have. If Trump has any path to victory, as you said, it will be because the Democrats have such a weak field. So it really all eyes are on who they pick to be his running mate.
Which leads to another curious question, which is why is Trump lowering expectations for Biden? He should be raising expectations for Biden so that when Biden does emerge, he disappoints rather than surprises, right? I mean, he's making it appear as if Biden's a drooling idiot. So if Biden's half competent in a debate, he'll overperform based on what Trump is preconditioning for.
Yeah, but I don't think you and I would see that going in and what we advise. I think at this point, Trump just doesn't have. That's never been his style over the last 5 years, 6 years that he's been in politics. Is to do anything that strategically
that we would recommend he do.
Yeah.
Hey, you're mad the Blue Jays aren't coming to Toronto. I'm happy the Blue Jays aren't coming to Toronto. Why the hell would we let a bunch of rich people working for super rich people travel back across the border to play a baseball game and jeopardize the fact that our schools could come back in the fall. We got to get serious about this COVID thing. We can't be making exceptions for games.
But how would it jeopardize? All the teams are going to be in their bubble, so to speak. Like, it's not like they're going out. They're coming. They're playing a baseball game, playing 3 games, and then leaving. I just think it puts a disadvantage on the Jays. So they're going to have to play every game somewhere where it's not their. They don't have home field advantage, so to speak, even though there's no fans there. So I think it puts it at a disadvantage, and I'm not sure what the difference between them playing in Buffalo or here is. There's still going to be the same rules in place. You see, the NHL is we're playing in Edmonton and Toronto, and they're keeping their hub or their.
But they're not dragging people across the border. I mean, the fucking Jays open in Florida. They open in Florida, and then they're going to fly back here? Who the fuck wants people flying from Florida into Toronto?
But who are they? But they're not. They're other than the other players. They're not seeing anyone. Like, it's not like they're allowed to go out and do anything. MLB has said that they have to stay quarantined, or they have to stay in their hotels. They go from the field to the hotels. Basically, the same as what the hockey players are doing here in Toronto. They go from the hotel to their practice ice.
Right.
So.
But if you were in charge, you'd have that border sealed up airtight, right?
Well, the border should have been sealed up in March, but this goes into the long-term planning right now as to what government should be doing, because it is not economically viable to keep the border shut indefinitely. So right now, we've got the state of the emergency is extended to August 21st. So that's when the border is shut. I assume that they're going to extend it at least again, but it's just not economically viable. Entire sectors are going to be going out of business on both sides of the border, but it's disproportionately going to affect Canada. So this is what I wish governments were working on in terms of a viable solution into eventually opening up the border, because it just is not sustainable for us to keep it the way that it is now.
Yeah, Peter Nicholson and a couple other people wrote a piece about opening the border for Quotes.media and for Quotes Media, and they said, I mean, they were agreeing with you. Border has to open. It's fundamental to the economy. We've got to get some traffic going. But they were suggesting either that people have to agree to be quarantined, or a very aggressive testing and tracing program once you're here. It's even that wouldn't be a great facilitation of cross-border travel. I mean, what do you think we need to see out of the States before we can feel comfortable opening up our border?
Like in terms of cases?
Yeah.
But I think that there are obviously some very troubling states right now, but this has kind of gone back to the discussions we had months ago. We always knew there was going to be more cases once there was no lockdown. The lockdown was never to prevent cases. The lockdown was to prevent hospitals from being overwhelmed. And so this is what governments should be working on. We are now, until there is a vaccine, and there might never be a vaccine, although a lot of the preliminary reports now are that there are vaccines in there, and they seem to be working. So knock on wood that continues. But the lockdown was never to prevent cases. It was to prevent an overrun of the hospital. So I think that this is what governments, to go back to what we talked about in terms of what they should be working on in terms of long-term economic, opening up the border. We have to come up with a way, and opening up schools. We have to come up with a way to live with this virus.
Jenni, do you think we really need Scott on these panels?
This was a lot of fun, but I do miss Reed. I would be happy. I'll be happy when he's off his vacation.
Yeah, me too. But this was great. Thanks for coming in to chat, Jenni. It's always fun.
Thank you.
Take care of yourself this week.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Kate and Jenni, for joining the show. As always, it was fun, and I certainly learned a lot, as I always do. I hope you did too. You could really help promote this podcast if you're so inclined by subscribing to it, by going to the iTunes website and giving us a rating or a review, or by promoting it on social media. All those things get Apple's attention, and they in turn then distribute the podcast more broadly, and it gets to more people, which we'd appreciate. So if you can help us, give us a hand. I'd also like to tell you about a new feature we have. Air quotes, the people behind the Herle Burly podcast have also launched a written word section called Quotes. This is on the airquotesmedia.com website, and Quotes collects interesting ideas about policy and politics from people who are looking for a platform to get their ideas and their thoughts into the public domain. It could be about policy, it could be about politics. We have a super interesting piece up that analyzes the Morneau snapshot. We've got a very thoughtful and complicated piece that talks about the opening of the border between Canada and the United States. And as of yesterday, Kate and her colleagues have posted a piece on what needs to happen by government in order to get childcare functional this summer in time for the fall. There will be articles coming every week. We promise you they'll be interesting and thought-provoking. So if you're so inclined, check out airquotesmedia.com and look for quotes.